All right, Mr. Ray, you ready to proceed?
Ready.
All right, go ahead.
Mr. Weaver, as y'all recall, he did voir dire, so I didn't get to talk to you too much. We kind of broke it up. He got stuck with that task in lieu of me doing opening statements. So my name is Michael Ray. Along with John Luke Weaver, we're representing Mr. Farris. Thank y'all for your service. I know that a 3 or 4 excuse me, a three or 4 week long trial is not how you anticipated spending your beginning of fall. So we do appreciate that, and we have worked quite diligently. I've had this case for 6 years now, of trying to whittle it down to what is the most important pieces of evidence to show to you and to present to you, so that you can make a decision in this case. So I don't think we're going to go beyond 4 weeks. It could get done as early as 3, but it might go into 4. But we're definitely going to try to get it moving as quickly as possible. For your jury service, Abraham Lincoln said that one of the greatest services of a citizenship is jury duty. And I think that's very true. It's the equivalent, in my opinion, of voting. Because without you, 16 people we have, or if it was in state court, the 6 people we would have, without you, we couldn't do this. We couldn't do our job. Justice couldn't be done. Justice couldn't be done for Melody without you. So thank you for serving. When you act as a juror, or when you're sitting as a juror, in this particular case, and in all cases, you are essentially the conscience of the community. Because you're going to hear this evidence, then you're going to apply it to the law that the judge is going to give you, and you're going to render a decision. Because if you recall, when Judge Cannon was going over the oath with you that he read to you last thing, I know you've taken a lot of it. You took one downstairs when there was 120 of you, and then you took another one when you came in your jury panel, and then you came in with the 16 of you and you took another oath. But in that oath that you took an oath to give a truth verdict according to the evidence. And that's what we're asking you to do. And you heard the judge say that it's your duty to render a truth verdict based on the evidence. And that's exactly what we'll be asking you to do. Now, Mr. Fogus, he did a good job in his opening statement. So some of the things are duplicated because obviously when he came in, he didn't know what I was going to say. And when I came in, I didn't know what he was going to say. But I don't want to sit there and regurgitate the same things. But we got to talk about a few things. That one being the indictment. Mr. Fogus did a great job going through explaining it. So just kind of to recap what Ms. Farris is charged with. 1, malice murder. That is essentially, to keep it simple, and we'll go over it much deeper at the end when the judge actually gives you the charge. And then we get to argue. What malice murder is, somebody's alive, and I don't want them alive. And they're dead. That's malice murder. Felony murder, I commit a felony act, and it causes that person's death. Like you're trying to rob somebody, you accidentally shoot them, felony murder. That's what it is. In this case, the felony is the aggravated assault. The state alleges that Ms. Farris shot her husband, Gary Farris. And that was an aggravated assault. And as a result of that assault, he died. So that's how felony, murder, and aggravated assault are linked together. Concealing the death of another is pretty obvious. There's a little more depth to it when you actually look at the actual elements of the offense, but you can imagine what that is. Somebody has passed away, and you have concealed it. Making false statements, that's lying to the police. We always say defense attorneys can lie to you, but you cannot lie to the police. It's actually a crime. So, this case, and you've heard a little bit of it from Mr. Fogus, but you've probably seen on your crime show, because I know from voir dire, a lot of you watch the podcast, the crime shows, the true crime and all that. And you always see defense attorneys talking a lot of time about there's been a rush to judgment in this case. Rush to prosecute the first person that you can get your hands on. Now, that wasn't this case. Melody was under investigation in this case for over almost a year between the 911 call that you're going to hear shortly and her arrest on June 18th of 2019. So there wasn't a rush to judgment, but what we had in this case was different. It was called confirmation bias. And we'll talk more about this in close, but what a confirmation bias is you got a belief and you've got facts. And that belief and those facts merge together. And that's what you believe. even though you have all of these other facts over here, you just ignore those facts because that's not in your belief. And that's not in the facts that you want to look at. And that is a confirmation bias. You're going to see from the evidence in this case, from day one, the investigation by Detective Hayes and all of the other officers in Cherokee County Sheriff's Office, even the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, the GBI, everything that was done in this case was tailored specifically to attempt to convict Melody of the death of Gary Farris. One big thing you're going to hear, and you're going to hear it a lot, is Scott Farris. You are going to hear the 911 call here shortly. That's the first thing we're going to do. I'm going to play you the 911 call. 13 minutes after law enforcement arrives, Scott Farris is already blaming his mother. He knows nothing. They're not even sure if there is a body on the burn pile. They're not even sure it's Gary. He's already planting the seeds of blaming his mother. 13 minutes. And law enforcement took that into their beliefs. And then they focused their evidence on that. And that is confirmation bias. Now, you heard Mr. Fogus talk about the Ferris wheel, and I talk about it too. That this was a turbulent family. The best is, and we'll go through, I have a family tree to go over with you that kind of lays everybody out. But one of them, his name's Chad Bruce. He is now married to Amanda. And Chad Bruce, when he was interviewed, he said, I always called it the Ferris wheel. It's like a soap opera. Something is always going on with Chris, Scott, and Emily. And it's true. All the time. All the time. And I'll talk a little bit more about it. But you're going to see text messages. Gary mad that they're blowing money. Chris can't survive on his own, always needing money. Scott, a grown man, can't survive on his own, always needing money. Coming to get mama's credit card so he can go get some money out. Emily with her turmoil with her new husband and all that. In fact, you're also going to hear that Gary and Melody had to buy Emily and her husband the house up in Tennessee where they live. There was a lot of turmoil in this family. But jumping on the Ferris wheel, first off, who is Melody? Melody was born in 1960. And she was born in Smyrna, Tennessee. And she had a somewhat unusual upbringing, especially for that point in time. Melody was very little, and they moved from Smyrna and moved to Tullahoma. You already heard a little bit about Tullahoma. It's actually where Melody was arrested. That's where Martha Jane lives. That's where Rusty lives. And I'll talk a little bit more about all those people. They moved to Tullahoma, and Melody and her mother, Kay, lived with Melody's grandparents. And that went on for a few years, and eventually Kay Walker met a man named Carl Walker, and they got married. And then they continued, once they were married, they bounced around a little bit. They went from Tullahoma to Nashville, Nashville to Florence, Florence back to Nashville, just kind of bouncing around this North Alabama, Central Tennessee and back down area, just moving around. Then when Melody was a teenager, they finally settled in Florence, Alabama. It's in the north. You've probably heard of Muscle Shoals. It's right there. And that's where eventually Melody started going to high school, was in that area. And so now you're like in the mid-70s, and that's actually when Melody meets Gary Farris. They met when they were 16 years old. They didn't go to the same high school. They actually met through mutual friends at the same church, and they began dating. And they dated through high school, and then in 1970, they got married. So if 1960, I think it was 79, they got married, because I think Melody was 19 years old. Now, they get married, right out of high school, and they both go to the University of North Alabama. Melody's there for about a year, and then she drops out. Gary stays on. So Melody leaves. They're still together. They're still married. And she's working at General Electric Credit and Ace Hardware. Her Kay Walker, her mother, Carl Walker, opened up a Ace Hardware in Florence, Alabama. And that's where Melody worked. And you'll hear a lot about Ace Hardware. She worked there for many, many, many years, helping them out with their business. So in 1980, while Gary's still in school, Chris Farris is born. Now Melody is working full-time at this point at the hardware store. Gary's full-time college student. 1983 rolls around, Scott Farris is born. Melody's still working at the hardware store. Gary's still going to school. Now you fast forward a little bit, Gary's graduated, and in 1988 they have Emily. And at this point they've moved to Tuscaloosa to the University of Alabama. And that's where Gary goes to law school. So they're living there with the 3 kids while Gary's in law school. And then in 1989, Amanda Farris, who's now Amanda Bruce, she's born. Excuse me. In 1989, the following year, Gary graduates law school, and the family moves to Birmingham, where he works for Burr and Foreman, the same firm that he was at when he passed away. Now, in 1995, the law firm sent Gary to Atlanta. They were trying to expand, have a different office in Atlanta, and Gary was going to be a major part of that. And I think when he actually first got there in 95, there was only him and another person there. It wasn't, this huge law firm, at least here in Atlanta, at that point in time. So 95, you got 4 kids, really ranging from kindergarten to Chris at that point in time being about 15 years old. Melody's a stay-at-home mom. She's going back and forth to Florence to help her parents with the hardware store and just living. And an interesting point then comes later in 1997 to Melody is Carl Walker, who she thought was her father, passed away. And while she was at the funeral, a relative came up to her and told her that, just so you know, Carl Walker's not your father. And so then that leads on to her trying to figure out who her actual father is. And she does. But Carl raised her. It's just an odd thing, to kind of come out of the blue in 1997 at his funeral. Now in 2013, it's kind of the next major event. That is when Gary and Melody buy the Purcell Lane house, where you saw the photos in Mr. Fogus's opening of the house. That's when that was purchased, 2013. They move in there, and when they get there, shortly thereafter, Scott moves in to the apartment that is above the barn. Now, all the kids, they also have kids and wives that are relevant to this case. And Scott was married to Jenna. And her name was Jenna Farris. Since Gary's death, my understanding is they have divorced. She has changed her name. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. I haven't talked to her to figure out how she pronounces it. But that is, Jenna Farris was her name. Chris also has other children by another woman, and that is Ella Farris and Addison Farris. Ella, at the time in July, the 3rd, 4th, 5th of 2018, she was over at her friend Emma's house. And Addison was over at Melody and Gary's house on the 5th, on the 4th. She came over after the lake. And I'll go through the timeline. Emily, this is Chris Payne, with the prior difficulties of the family. Chris Payne was a little bit of that. And Amanda is married to Chad. Chad's the one I was telling you about. He's the one who talked about the Ferris wheel and about how there's always something going on, and basically this family is like a soap opera. That is Chad. And Chad also has a daughter by another woman, and her name is Cameron Bruce. Cameron is who was there with Addison on the 4th. Now, let's talk about the timeline. So, you already heard a lot about the burn pile. So, Gary did start the burn pile on July 3rd. Okay, we know that. That's a fact. Also, a couple of other interesting things happened. Addison and Cameron don't live in Georgia. All right? Those are Chris's children. Or Ella and Addison do not live in Georgia. They live in Maine. on July 3rd, they flew in to Hartsville-Jackson. Chris went and picked them up, and they drove up. They came to Melody and Gary's house. Ella had already been dropped off at Emma's house, and Addison came with Chris to see Melody and Gary. And they see both Melody and Gary. Now it is, and I'll go into it more here in a moment, there is some contention about what Addison says how the house was on the 4th, but we'll talk about that here in a minute. Now on the 4th, that is when Melody goes to Lake Lanier. We actually, you'll see, and the evidence will show that we've got a parking receipt. I actually got two things. We've got a parking receipt from Lake Lanier that shows the time that she went in. There's also a ATM slip that was in her car that we got photographs of to show that her withdrawing money, and that was on the 3rd. And we'll talk about those here more in a minute. July 4th, that is when Addison and Cameron spend the night at the house. Now, Cameron and Addison, the evidence show they have two different versions of events about how it was. Addison's more, it was kind of weird. Melody didn't want us to go outside. She made us go to bed early. Cameron will testify that they did go outside. They went and saw the horses. Nothing was weird. We actually snuck out of the house at 10 o'clock, went to the hot tub, were in the hot tub for a while, came back in, went to bed. Nothing really out of the normal. The reason, you'll also see that some evidence from Addison. There's a text message to Melody from Addison that says, hey, can we spend the night tonight on July the 3rd? And Melody responds, says, no, not tonight. And we'll have to uncover the reason for that, do the evidence. I don't want to speculate here as to what that was. But we do know that that is true. She said, no, not tonight. And she spent the night the following night after they got back from Lake Lanier. On July 5th, that is where things with this case get interesting. The remains are found on the burn pile. Now, that day started, Melody grocery shopping, the kids are there. But to sum it up, what it's really going to show is the girls wanted to ride the RTV. Melody says, go downstairs and ask your grandpa. They called him Big Daddy. Go downstairs and ask him. He's not there. I don't know where he is. So they start looking for him. Eventually, Amanda comes over because what originally the plan was is Melody, Amanda, Addison, and Cameron, they were going to have a day together. They were probably going to go eat lunch. They had talked about potentially going to get their nails done, and basically just having a girls' day together. Now, when Amanda got there, they all began looking around the house. Can't find it. Gary's nowhere to be found. His car's still there. But none of this is super out of normal. Gary was a workaholic. Sometimes he would take Uber so he didn't have to drive. He essentially would be gone, for days. He may come home, he may not. And we'll get into their relationship here in a minute. So no alarms were really raised at this point. Now, Scott comes over, and that's where things do get interesting. When Scott gets there, he comes in the house and immediately goes downstairs after proclaiming to the family something along the lines of, where's the gun? And he goes downstairs, then returns and says, the gun's gone. Now let's talk about this gun. I call it the magic gun because Scott Farris is the only person to ever see this gun. There's nobody else, only him. You'll hear evidence that he found it in the drawer while he was looking for a remote to help the DirecTV man. And then he found the gun. He gives a very detailed description of it. And that's it. Nothing else. And this was a few months before July when he had the DirecTV. Actually, I think it was the beginning of June, so about a month before is when Scott sees this gun. And he claims he has no idea. He's never seen this gun before. It's very strange. This gun is here, and he didn't know anything about it. But he also didn't do anything about it. Now, 6 years later, this is where Jenna Farris kind of comes in and is interesting. 6 years later, she gives an interview to the district attorney's office claiming she also saw a gun in the basement that you saw in Mr. Focus's opening, where Gary was. However, this gun looked completely different than the one Scott described and is in a completely different location than where Scott said it was. So these are the only two people that have seen this gun, and the guns they described don't even match each other, and one of them talked about it 6 years later. Now, after Gary's remains were found, he was taken down to Georgia Bureau of Investigation Forensics Department to the crime lab, and that's where an autopsy was performed. But after July 5th, 2018, 348 days go by. Melody's not arrested at this point. She's interviewed several times. I believe the evidence will show that, or I believe that the state will be playing those interviews for you, so you'll actually see Melody testifying and answering law enforcement questions. But 348 days pass. Now in that 348 days, you'll see evidence they were doing audio testing. What that was is they put a ballistics dummy in the living room of the house, and they shot it with a revolver. And they had members of the Cherokee Marshal's office, as well as some sheriff's office, out there with decibel readers at different points. They were out at the barn, they were out by the road, and they were also in the house, measuring what the decibel was for firing this revolver into this ballistic dummy. And then they moved the dummy downstairs, and they shot it a bunch of times downstairs. And you're going to see all this. They're going to play all the videos of them doing the shooting and recording the sounds and all that. Diving in the lake, you're going to see they brought out the Cherokee Sheriff's Department to dive into the lake to see about where the gun was. Didn't find anything. Recording Melody's phone calls. And we'll talk more about this momentarily. Rusty, because you already heard about him, agreed with Detective Hayes that he would put some kind of app on his phone and record all their phone calls. And he did, for months. You're going to hear a lot of those. Also, during that 348-day time, Scott and Chris are interviewed several times. Sometimes Scott and Chris are interviewed together, at least on one occasion, and several times Scott is interviewed alone. And then, on June 12th, over 11 months later, the crime lab issues the autopsy report, saying that Gary was the manner of death and the cause of death. Well, the cause of death was gunshot. The manner of death was homicide. And it took them 11 months to issue that report. You'll see, especially when the forensic pathologist who did the autopsy, when he testifies, they weren't waiting on anything. They knew that it was Gary. The forensic, the dental forensics had already come back. It was already Gary. But for some reason, unknown, and you'll see this happens a lot in this case, there's a lot of unknown, and we'll talk about that. No idea why it took 11 months to issue the autopsy report. No idea. But 6 days later, Melody gets arrested. And Mr. Focus is right. She wasn't in Tullahoma, Tennessee. She was up there with Martha Jane. They called her and said, "Hey, we got an arrest warrant for you." And she came and turned herself in. Nothing to hide. Now, John Luke and I came up with this. Actually, well, we didn't come up with it. He had gone. We were been a long day already, so he was done for the day, so he left. And he went up to the drugstore, and there was a girl in there. And the drugstore, I don't know if your office is in downtown Jasper. There's a Jasper drugstore. It's right on the corner on Main Street in Jasper. It's being sold, and they're doing renovations. And he went in there and asked them a question about something, and they didn't know. And they go, sometimes the greatest questions go unanswered. And he was like, "Oh, perfect. Brought me out of my slump. Now I know what I'm dealing with." So that's kind of what we've been talking about the whole time with this case. Because so many things, you're going to be asking yourself so many times in this case, how did this happen? How did this happen? How did this happen? And nobody knows. You can guess. Nobody's going to know. So let's talk about some evidence and questions without answers. So evidence, Melody and Gary. It is no fact, I think also, Melody and Gary affairs. It is common knowledge that they had affairs. People knew. You can even, the grandkids, the evidence will show that even they had their suspicions and pretty well knew that, there was, affairs happening. Melody did. She was having an affair with Rusty. Gary did. He brought, when they moved here in 1995, Angela Phillips was his secretary. He brought her with him from Birmingham to Atlanta. And she was his secretary for 28 years. And she's a bit hesitant to talk about it, but I believe you'll be hearing from her about how they did have a relationship. Gary was also having a relationship, at least somewhat by text and email, with another woman who worked in his building named Joanne Ward or Joanne Hill. So, and you'll also hear Ted Wiley. Okay, they had affairs. They lived completely separate lives. In the house that Mr. Focus was showing you, in that house, Melody lived upstairs. You saw the house, and it may not be in evidence, but you saw it. That place looks like Southern Living magazine, decorated to the nines. Melody did all that. She lived upstairs. Gary lived downstairs. It was just how they had done it. It had always been that way for years, ever since the 90s. They lived two separate lives. They would sometimes go days without even seeing each other, without speaking to each other. They didn't really talk. They didn't really communicate. They did. They had kids. So they had to have some interaction together. They went and saw Emily and Chris's daughter. Her name's Olivia, when she was born. They still did Christmases together. So they did some of these family things together, but for the most part, they were just married people who did their own thing. And Melody did her thing, and Gary did his thing. And it was just what worked for them. Now, granted, with the affairs, it wasn't something that was flaunted in their faces. You try to keep some level of discretion. But it was known. And it was just how they lived. Now, Melody's interviews, I expect that you'll be seeing those interviews. And really, the only thing I want to point out of that is Melody is very blunt, very to the point. She's just who she is. She's a hard woman. And that's how she comes off, and that's how she is with law enforcement. She's very matter of fact. Here's what happened, here's what I was doing. That's just how she is. But one of the most important things that she says in her interviews, in the very last interview that she ever gave to law enforcement, last thing she ever said to law enforcement was, "I just want my family back." Forensics. There's a good bit of forensics in this case. Some is pretty interesting. I want to talk to you. I didn't want to do any of the photographs, but those blood drops that were talked about by Mr. Vogus, you will see there is a substance leading down to the basement. You're going to hear from the GBI Lana Coffee. She sprays Blue Star, which is a substance that is supposed to reflect when it's blood. Now, that's a whole other thing. You're not going to hear anything about that being tested, of whose blood it is, even if it is blood. Now, you go down the stairs. They did take a swab, but they find some little drops of blood. Some of them are about as small, or even smaller than 1 centimeter, on the floor. Take a swab of those, send it off. That was Gary's blood. Those blood trails never lead out of the house, upstairs or downstairs. You also, the bullet. We're going to be talking a lot about the bullet, how there's no textiles found on the bullet that is found in the basement. We also have our own forensic pathologist who will be testifying about what his opinion is regarding the manner and cause of death of Gary. And we may also end up calling an additional ballistics expert, depending on how things play out with the ballistics expert who's going to testify for the GBI. But that is just a wait and see. Text messages. The text messages to Terry Braswell. Mr. Fogus said that in his opening. Hope you die a gruesome death. It is a text message. We expect Terry Braswell to come in here and testify. We'll be able to cross-examine him about that text message. However, we do know one fact, is that text message was sent 2 years before. So it wasn't something that was done in July of 2018 or even June of 2018. Years before. Especially see text message between Gary and Scott about their tumultuous relationship, especially involving money. Gary sending to Scott, I better have my debit card back. Also see Melody and Scott, they used to text back and forth a lot. And recorded phone calls. You're going to hear all those calls with Rusty. Now, also with finances. Now, while that house was very nice, and it was like $1 million house, and it's decorated to the nines. And yeah, we've actually got some of Gary's pay stubs, and after taxes, he was bringing home $20,000. Can't remember if it was every 2 weeks or every month. But that home, mortgage to the hilt. Debt high, cash low. Gary stopped working, this family's over. And that's exactly what happened. Gary passes away, you're going to hear first thing that happens to the house, foreclosed. Didn't have enough money to pay for it. Cars gone. Everything put in storage. So while they made a lot of money, they blew a lot of money. Now Gary did have some good investments. He had a 401k with his law firm. 401k, profit sharing with the law firm, insurance, life insurance, things like that. But all those aren't accessible cash that you can use. So Gary had to keep working to fund this lifestyle. Now, questions without answers. Where was Gary shot? When Dr. Gooding testifies, she's going to have a drawing of a skeleton. And it's going to show the ribs, and it's going to show he was shot somewhere here. Is it the front or in the back? Not going to be able to tell you that. Angles, don't know. No idea. Also, and that's just where was he shot on the body. Where was he shot in the house? The evidence is going to show while there may be some blood and that was not tested, so we'll call it maybe blood. Upstairs in the in Melody's portion of the house, we'll call it, and a trail leading downstairs to Gary's portion, we'll call it. You're also going to get evidence from, most likely from Amanda, how a few days before July the 3rd, 4th, 5th, that Gary, that Gary had been bitten by one of Melody's dogs on the ankle and was bleeding as he walked down the stairs down to his room so that he could stop the bleeding in his ankle. And that's where the blood came from. But where was he shot? No idea. How was he put on the burn pile? You're not going to hear about that either. You're going to see photographs of tractors. You're going to see photographs of RTVs. Probably of horses too. But you're not going to hear anything about Gary being moved on one of those vehicles. You will hear, though, that there was one drop of blood that was Gary's on the step getting up into the tractor. There's nothing in like the bucket. One drop of blood on the tractor. Where is the gun? Don't know that either. Now, you're going to see photographs of guns. There were guns on the property. There was no .38 found on the property. I think there was an old .32 caliber that was found on the property. But we know that wasn't the gun in question. But what you will find is that Scott has quite a bit of .38 caliber ammunition in the barn. And in fact, he's got it in his bedside table. But yet he claims, and when he testifies, I assume he will be claiming the same thing, that he does not own a .38 caliber pistol. He will claim that he owned a .357 Magnum at one point, but that gun had been stolen years ago, and he didn't have anything that would shoot a .38. Yet he has at least one full box of .38 special ammunition and a loose several other various brands of .38 special in his nightstand. And you'll see all those. You'll see the photographs of those. But where is the gun? No idea. Where are the bullets? They're in Scott's house. Scott's behavior. From the very beginning, like I told you, from the very beginning, Scott is saying, Melody, Melody, Melody. I thought she would do something. Leading law enforcement down this trail. And you're going to see all that. It's going to be very evident of what his intentions are regarding his mother. He does it in his interviews, and he's going to do it on the stand here too. I would suspect that's exactly what he's going to do. But the most important thing is just in that few minutes of getting there, he's already talking about guns being missing that he's the only person that has seen. Then he goes out looking. You're also most likely going to be seeing there's a trail camera that was, if the burn pile was where I'm standing, was kind of, don't exactly know how far, but down closer to the lake. Kind of pointing at they had a deer feeder down there to take pictures of the animals. And you're going to see that coming up to that camera, for some reason, and I don't think we'll ever get a straight answer, we don't know why those photographs got deleted. Or actually, who actually deleted them. Now we know because they were recovered. So we know what photographs were on them, but we don't know of who deleted them. Now, you heard the judge talking about, before you took your oath, about what reasonable doubt was. And he said that reasonable doubt was a doubt of a fair-minded and impartial juror honestly seeking the truth. Then he also went on for a little bit and talked about if your minds are unwavering, unsettled, or unsatisfied, that is a doubt to the law. And with that, you should acquit the defendant. So essentially, when you're looking at this case, whenever we had done, when you're evaluating this case and you're evaluating all the evidence, you've got to say, has the state proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt? Now, what a reasonable doubt is that you have a doubt that you can put a reason to. And it's reasonable. It is a reasonable doubt. Now, that is a high burden for the state. Now, I'll go over this and close. I know it's like how it shows that even if the state can get to reasonable doubt, no, that's still an acquittal. That's still not guilty, because they have to go beyond reasonable doubt. And remember, that is just a doubt for which you can put a reason. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you have, like in this case, when you have questions that go unanswered, when we're talking about unanswered questions of how did we get to the burn pile? Where's the gun? Where's the bullets? Where are these simple things that we should be able to find? And why, when we find them, they're in a place that, well, we don't like where that's going. Law enforcement saw the bullets over in the barn. Yet here we are with Melody charged with malice murder, felony murder, ag assault. Nobody heard anything. You're not going to hear anything about this case that Melody heard, or that anybody heard Melody shoot him, or that she admitted to somebody that she shot him. You did hear from, and you'll hear from him again, from Mr. Barton, from Rusty, that he said, Melody said he's on the burn pile. And what Mr. Barton changed, and he'll be under direct and cross-examination in this case, is what he changed. He didn't change what she said. He changed when she said it. So he said, yes, Melody said they found him on the burn pile, not on the 4th, was on either the 5th or the 6th when she was talking to him saying, hey, they found Gary dead on the burn pile. Rusty didn't change what he said. He told him when he said it. He got it wrong, and he corrected himself. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you have unanswered questions in a case like this, really the only answer is not guilty. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Fogus, you got witnesses ready?
Please, Judge. Now, the first one is by agreement of stipulation, Judge.
All right, go ahead. Y'all can decide whether y'all want the mobile lectern to stay there or whether y'all want to get rid of it. The last trial, everybody used both of them. So.
It's good, Judge, if we keep it. You know, the first exhibit is going to be, it's labeled 911-1 for 911 call, and it is July 5th, 2018 at 12:47 p.m. July 5th, 2018 at 12:47 p.m. It's about 2 minutes and 21 seconds, and it's Scott Farris. And Judge, I tune that into evidence this time by stipulation. All right. May I publish it? It's 911 and then 1 in parenthetical.
Sure would be offered about you. I'm not. I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Y'all agree to the foundation and
2155 or so, Blaine. My father has come up missing, and we just searched the property. It's a small farm, and I just found something near the farm that doesn't. He was burning brush. Now there's nothing to find that. It could be him. I don't know.
Okay. All right, sir. What's Purcell Lane run off of?
It's right off of Birmingham Road.
You said 2155 Purcell Lane, that's correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what is your name?
Scott Farris, Farris.
What's a good callback number for you, Scott?
404-861-2667.
How old is you said your father?
Yes, sir.
How old is
he just turned 63 on the 68, yeah.
68, okay.
Now I'm calling you to say that we've been walking around looking for him, and I went where the fire's still smoldering, and I'm ex-military. I was deployed to Iraq. I've seen what burned up bodies look like, and this looks like a body.
Okay. All right, sir. I've got him on the way out there for you. I'm going to send the police and the fire department out there. Just try and leave everything that you can, the way you found it down there, and we've got him on the way out there for you. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Is there anything else I can do for you, sir?
No, that'll be it.
All right, sir. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.